Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to start my 5 minutes with a video that I came across, and it really struck a chord. This happened in Miami. The women in the video were worried. They had been threatened by a neighbor who had a shotgun and was making racist slurs. They called 911 for safety and for protection. Instead, they were met with force.
I have to be corrected when my life was just threatened and my daughter's sick. I just want to go to the store and charge my phone.
No, please stop. She didn't even do nothing.
Touch me. Do not touch me. Do not touch me.
What
do
the
not
heck? I am. What the? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that?
Do not touch
Why are you
me.
doing that?
Do not touch me.
She's not doing nothing.
I wanted to call my kids. I just said I wanted to call my kids. My phone is dead. What do you not understand? I got a gun pointed in front of me, and my kids is sick. I'm stressed out. I need to go call my children.
Ramos?
Conduct like this is never acceptable. The woman was unarmed. She called 911 because she felt threatened. She called 911 hoping that police officers would come to protect her. And instead, you saw those images. The officer in this video later lied about what happened on the police report and is now facing charges of misconduct and battery. Let me tell you, this happened only 2 months ago. There was no reason to subject someone to excessive force because of the color of their skin. And the reality is that people of color live and face these prejudices throughout their entire lives. They face discrimination. It's ingrained in our culture since the very founding of our country. And we have to confront this crisis head on. Currently, right now, there is absolutely no national standard to require police officers to de-escalate and avoid the use of excessive force. We have to eliminate the injustices that Black men and women and communities of color face everywhere, in our government, in our society, in our healthcare system, and specifically in the police systems that we have seen for decades. I can also tell you that from my own personal experience, this is not representative of every police officer. I have very close relationships with law enforcement in Miami. Officer Tooks, McCombie, Officer Demps, they are part of the community. They have earned the trust of the community. But we have to start by accepting that there is racial bias in our police system. We have to accept that. I continue to hear from members of this administration that there's no racism, that there's no racial bias. And that is not true. Racism is systemic, and we have to hold our police departments accountable and demand transparency. To do that, we have to engage with the community through civilian oversight. Civilian oversight boards build bridges between police and communities by giving the people a voice in the policies that affect them. They ensure officer accountability through fair and open investigation, and over time, they build trust. Civilian oversight has to be done correctly, however. They have to be independent, they have to have subpoena power, they must have the authority to conduct investigations into police misconduct, and most importantly, civilian oversight boards have to represent the diversity in the community. Its seats need to be filled not by political appointees, but with local citizens and the leaders of local organizations focused on community policing and accountability. So I'm proud that the Justice and Policing Act promotes civilian oversight and allows federal funding to go toward building civilian review boards. So my first question is to Mr. Ron Davis. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned in your testimony the need for police to collaborate with the community to redefine and reimagine policing. And that includes a new system that fosters civilian oversight. Can you please explain why civilian oversight is an important factor in preventing police brutality and is effective in holding police accountable?
Yes, Congresswoman, and thank you for the call. I'll refer back to, I think as one of your colleagues mentioned, Sir Robert Peel, the 10 principles, or some called the 9 principles of law enforcement. And one of them says that police or use their authority with the consent of people. And the best way to have the consent is you need the checks and balances to make sure that those, for our police officers, myself included when I was serving, to have such enormous and awesome power, the power to take freedom, the power to take life, are held accountable with a check and balance system so that there is trust, that there's legitimacy, and that there's accountability. So civilian oversight provides that extra layer, the same way we want independent prosecutors, independent investigations of lawful shootings. To have an independent civilian oversight body is a checks and balance so that the awesome power that the police are given by the community is accountable. We're accountable for that, and that we then police with the consent of the people, and that's the only way we can be effective. So there are varying models with it, but I think in general, the core principle of civilian oversight does go towards community policing. It makes the police and the community producers of public safety, both responsible, both being accountable, and it's the best form of oversight that you can have.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. And Mr. Floyd, thank you so much for joining us today. Losing someone in a violent manner and having footage of that has to be the most devastating way of losing someone. So I share with all my colleagues here today my deepest condolences to you and the family, and we're here for anything that you need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back.
Our great senators. Hi, Chuck. He used to love me when I was a Democrat, you know.